I never expected to be rich. My apartment was modest, my car functional but unremarkable, and the reality of a 34-year-old high school English teacher in a small New England town was accurately reflected in my bank account. When the letter arrived from the law firm of Blackwood and Son, I assumed a mistake had been made. Among my bills, the heavy cream envelope with its embossed letterhead felt out of place. Inside was a summons to attend the reading of the last will and testament of Harold Thorne. Harold Thorne, a distant relative, my mother's second cousin. We had met twice, once at a family reunion when I was 7, and again at my mother's funeral 12 years ago. He had seemed ancient then, a tall figure in an impeccable suit with piercing blue eyes that looked through you rather than at you. With a firm handshake, he had offered condolences and slipped me his business card, saying, "If you ever need anything, Matthew." I never called, and now he was dead, and I was being called to the reading of his will. The next day, I called the number on the letter. "Blackwood and Sons, how may I direct your call?" The receptionist's voice was crisp. "My name is Matthew Collins. I received a letter about the reading of Harold Thorne's will." "Ah, Mr. Collins. Yes, we've been expecting your call. Mr. Blackwood would like to speak with you personally." The line clicked, and a deep voice came on. "Mr. Collins, Malcolm Blackwood here. Thank you for calling. Mr. Blackwood, I think there might be some mistake. Harold Thorne was barely an acquaintance." "There's no mistake, Mr. Collins. Mr. Thorne was very specific about who should be present. The car service will collect you Thursday at 9 a.m. The reading will take place at Thornewood Manor. Thornewood Manor, Mr. Thorne's estate about 2 hours north of your residence in Millfield." "No problem. It's just unexpected." "Many things about Harold Thorne were unexpected, Mr. Collins. That's what made him such an interesting client." In Blackwood's tone, there was something I couldn't identify. "The driver will have further details. Good day." Before I could ask more questions, the line went dead. At my kitchen table, I sat staring at the letter. Thornewood Manor. The name conjured images of Gothic mansions and family secrets, not something that should exist in modern-day Massachusetts. Thursday came quickly. I had taken a personal day from school, telling the principal I had a family matter to attend to. Technically true, I suppose. The car that arrived was a sleek black Lincoln. The driver, a taciturn man, introduced himself only as porter. With a slight bow, he held the door. "Mr. Collins," he said, his accent faintly British. "It's a pleasure." "You knew Harold Thorne?" I asked as we pulled away. In the rearview mirror, Porter's eyes met mine. "I worked for Mr. Thorne for 27 years, sir. I knew him as well as anyone could." "What was he like?" A pause. "Complicated." The conversation lapsed into silence. Porter seemed disinclined to elaborate, and I watched the landscape change as we drove north. Urban sprawl gave way to countryside dotted with small towns. Finally, we turned onto a narrow road that wound through dense forest, the trees forming a canopy overhead that dimmed the morning light. After several miles, the forest opened up, revealing a vast expanse surrounding what could only be Thornewood Manor. The house, a mansion, really, was massive, built of dark stone with turrets and gables, tall windows, and a slate roof. It looked like it had been transplanted from the English countryside. Through wrought iron gates and up a curved driveway to the front entrance Porter drove, where a broad stone staircase led to massive double doors of dark wood. "We've arrived, Mr. Collins." Porter opened my door. "Mr. Blackwood is already inside with the other guests." "Other guests?" Of course, I wasn't the only one named in Harold Thorne's will. That made more sense. The interior was as imposing as its exterior. High ceilings, dark wood paneling, oil paintings in ornate frames, and antique furniture that looked both valuable and uncomfortable. Across a marble floor in the entrance hall, a crystal chandelier cast prismatic light. To a set of doors at the end of a corridor, Porter led me. The library. Sir, they're waiting for you. The library was cavernous, 2 stories high with bookshelves that reached to the ceiling, accessible by a spiral staircase. One wall was dominated by a massive fireplace. Above it, hanging was a portrait of a stern-faced man with familiar piercing blue eyes. Harold Thorne, looking as I remembered him, only younger. As I entered, 5 people turned. Malcolm Blackwood I recognized immediately, tall with silver hair and a well-trimmed beard, dressed in an expensive suit. He stepped forward. "Mr. Collins, thank you for joining us. Please have a seat." The others were strangers, a woman in her early 50s, blonde hair cut in a sharp bob, wearing a tailored black dress. Beside her, a man of similar age with a receding hairline and wire-rimmed glasses. On the opposite side of the room, a younger woman, perhaps in her late 20s, with dark hair and striking green eyes. And finally, an elderly man in his 80s, thin and frail-looking in a wheelchair. "Allow me to make introductions," Blackwood said. "This is Margaret Thorne, Harold's sister-in-law, and her husband, Dr. Richard Evans." The blonde woman and the man with glasses nodded coolly. "Miss Eliza Ward, Harold's goddaughter." The dark-haired woman gave a slight smile. "And Mr. Edwin Thorne, Harold's cousin, and until recently, his closest living relative." The elderly man peered at me through rheumy eyes. "And this," Blackwood continued, "is Matthew Collins, son of the late Elizabeth Collins, née Marshall." "Marshall?" Edwin Thorne's voice was surprisingly strong. "Catherine's girl." "Yes," I said. "Catherine Marshall was my grandmother." With interest, Mr. Edwin studied me. "You have her eyes." "Now that we're all acquainted," Blackwood said, "shall we proceed?" Around the fireplace, we arranged ourselves in leather armchairs. Standing remained Blackwood, a portfolio in his hands. As executor of Harold Thorne's estate, it is my duty to read his last will and testament and to explain certain unusual provisions therein. He glanced around the room. "Before I begin, I should note that Harold was of sound mind when this document was prepared and signed." "The end that came rather suddenly," Margaret said, her voice brittle. "A healthy man of 73 doesn't simply drop dead of heart failure." "Margaret," her husband murmured, putting a hand on her arm. "The medical examiner found nothing suspicious," Blackwood said. "But we're not here to discuss the circumstances of Harold's passing. We're here to address his wishes." The portfolio he opened and extracted several sheets of paper. "I, Harold Edward Thorne, being of sound mind and body, do hereby make, publish, and declare this to be my last will and testament, hereby revoking all previous wills." A formal cadence took on Blackwood's voice. "First, to my sister-in-law, Margaret Thorne, I leave the sum of $1 million with the hope that it will provide her with the security she has always sought." Margaret's face remained impassive, but her fingers tightened around her handbag. "To my dear friend and physician, Dr. Richard Evans, I leave my collection of rare medical texts and antiquities, along with the sum of $500,000, in gratitude for his years of care and friendship." Dr. Evans nodded, his expression unreadable. "To my goddaughter, Eliza Ward, I leave my collection of art and the sum of $2 million to be held in trust until her 35th birthday or until she has completed her doctoral studies, whichever comes first." Slightly, Eliza's green eyes widened, but she said nothing. "To my cousin, Edwin Thorne, I leave my personal effects, my library of occult and esoteric literature, and the sum of $3 million. In his wheelchair, Edwin leaned forward. "The library, not the house." Neutral remained Blackwood's expression. "The will addresses the disposition of Thornewood Manor separately." He continued reading. "As to the matter of Thornewood Manor itself, along with all its grounds, outbuildings, and the remainder of my estate, including all investments, business interests, and liquid assets, approximately $70 million at the time of this writing, I hereby bequeath it all to Matthew Collins, son of Elizabeth Collins, née Marshall, contingent upon his acceptance of certain conditions." The room went silent. At me, 5 pairs of eyes turned to stare. I felt as if all the air had been sucked from the room. "There must be some mistake," I managed to say. "There is no mistake, Mr. Collins," Blackwood replied. Harold was very specific. "This is absurd," Margaret said, her voice sharp. Harold barely knew the man. Why would he leave everything to a virtual stranger? "The will explains his reasoning," Blackwood said, returning to the document. "My decision may seem unusual to those who believe themselves closer to me, but it is made with full awareness. The Thorne legacy requires a specific custodian, one who carries the bloodline but has remained untouched by its complexities." "Complexities?" Edwin scoffed. "Is that what we're calling it now?" The interruption was ignored by Blackwood. "Matthew Collins represents the last branch of the family tree that has not been compromised. He is the final heir." "Final heir to what exactly?" I asked. "That brings us to the conditions of the inheritance," Blackwood said. "According to the will, you must reside at Thornewood Manor for a minimum of 1 year before taking full possession. During that time, you will be required to study the history of the Thorne family and certain artifacts in Harold's collection. If you choose to decline, or if you fail to complete the year in residence, the entire estate will be liquidated and the proceeds donated to various charitable organizations, with nothing further going to anyone present." "This is outrageous." Margaret stood up, her face flushed. "Richard and I looked after Harold for years. We were family, not some distant relation who showed up twice in 30 years. The terms are quite clear, Mrs. Thorne," Blackwood said calmly, "and legally binding." "We'll contest it," she said. "Won't we, Edwin?" Into the fireplace, the elderly man stared, seeming lost in thought. "The bloodline," he murmured. "Always the bloodline. Edwin." He looked up, his gaze distant. "Contest if you wish, Margaret. It won't matter." Harold knew what he was doing. He always did. To me, he turned. "The question is whether young Mr. Collins here understands what he's being offered." $70 million and a mansion, I said. "It seems pretty straightforward." Laughed Edwin Thorne, a dry sound like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. "Oh, my boy. There's nothing straightforward about the Thorne inheritance. Nothing at all." "Mr. Collins," Blackwood interjected, "you don't need to make a decision immediately. The will allows you 30 days to consider. In the meantime, you're welcome to stay at Thornewood to get a feel for the place." "I have a job," I said. "Students, responsibilities, all of which can be addressed if you choose to accept," Blackwood replied. Harold made provisions. "A substantial stipend is available immediately to cover any transition costs, and Thornewood has a full staff who will continue to be employed regardless of your decision." My head was spinning. Yesterday, I had been worrying about making my car payment. Today, I was being offered more money than I could spend in a lifetime. It didn't seem real. "Perhaps we should continue this discussion tomorrow," Blackwood suggested. "It's a lot to take in, and I'm sure Mr. Collins would like some time to process. Porter will show each of you to your rooms. Dinner will be served at 7 o'clock. As the others filed out, for me to remain behind, Blackwood gestured. When we were alone, he closed the library doors and turned to me with a serious expression. "There are aspects of the will that I did not read aloud," he said. "Private instructions from Harold that concern only you." "What kind of instructions?" To a desk in the corner, Blackwood walked and unlocked a drawer with a key from his pocket. A sealed envelope he withdrew and handed to me. "Harold left this for you. He instructed me to give it to you privately after the formal reading of the will." The envelope was heavy, made of the same cream-colored paper as the letter I'd received, with my name written on it in an elegant flowing script. "What's in it?" I asked. "I don't know. It was sealed when Harold gave it to me." Blackwood hesitated. "But I should warn you, Mr. Collins, Harold Thorne was a complicated man, as Porter said. Brilliant, certainly. Wealthy, obviously. But there were aspects of his life and interests that were unusual. Unusual how? Harold was fascinated by the esoteric, the occult. Not in a frivolous way. He was a serious scholar, but his studies took him down some dark paths. Up at the portrait above the fireplace, Blackwood glanced. The Thorne family has a long and not entirely savory history. Wealth accumulated through questionable means. Rumors of dealings with forces best left undisturbed. You're talking about what exactly? Magic? Witchcraft? Serious remained Blackwood's expression. I'm a lawyer, Mr. Collins. I deal in facts, contracts, the letter of the law. But in my 20 years as Harold's attorney, I saw things that defied rational explanation. His tie he straightened. Just proceed with caution. Read what Harold has written, then make your decision. Alone in the library, he left me, the envelope heavy in my hands. Up at Harold Thorne's portrait, I stared, those piercing blue eyes seeming to follow me. After a moment's hesitation, I broke the seal and opened the envelope. Inside was a letter written in the same flowing script as my name on the envelope, and a small brass key. Dear Matthew, the letter began. If you are reading this, then I am dead, and Malcolm has fulfilled his duty as executor. No doubt you are confused by my decision to name you as my heir. The others certainly will be. They've spent years cultivating my favor, circling like vultures, waiting for me to die. But the Thorne inheritance was never theirs to claim. You carry the bloodline, Matthew. The true bloodline, through your grandmother, Catherine, who was wise enough to flee from the family legacy. She understood the price of Thorne wealth in a way that others never have. Enclosed, the key will open a cabinet in my private study, located behind the master bedroom on the second floor. Inside you will find a leather-bound journal, my journal, which explains everything. Read it carefully. Understand what you are being offered before you decide. Thornewood Manor is more than a house. The Thorne fortune is more than money. Both come with obligations that have weighed heavily on me, and on every Thorne heir before me. You have a choice, Matthew. A genuine choice, which is more than I ever had. Choose wisely. With hope and trepidation, Harold Thorne. The letter I folded and studied the key. It was small, intricately wrought, with a design on the bow that resembled a stylized tree. Unsettling were the implications of Harold's letter. What obligations? What price? And what did he mean about my grandmother understanding something the others didn't? My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the library doors. In the doorway stood Porter. Mr. Collins, I've come to show you to your room if you're ready. The key and letter I pocketed. Yes. Thank you, Porter. As we walked through the corridors of Thornewood Manor, I found myself studying the portraits that lined the walls, men and women in clothing from various eras, all with the same proud bearing, many with those distinctive, piercing blue eyes. The Thorne family? I asked Porter. Yes, sir. Generations of them. Your ancestors, in a manner of speaking. You said earlier that you knew Harold well. Forward kept Porter his gaze as we climbed a grand staircase to the second floor. As well as anyone, sir. What did you think of him? Before answering, he considered the question. Mr. Thorne was a fair employer, demanding but reasonable. He valued loyalty and discretion above all else. And his interest in the occult? Slightly, Porter's step faltered, but he recovered quickly. Mr. Thorne had many scholarly interests. Mr. Blackwood seemed to think there was more to it than scholarly interest. We had reached a door at the end of a corridor. Porter opened, revealing a spacious bedroom with a four-poster bed, antique furniture, and tall windows overlooking the grounds. Your room, sir. The bathroom is through that door. Dinner is at 7 o'clock in the dining room. I'll come to escort you down, as the house can be confusing for newcomers. To leave, he turned. Porter, I said, you didn't answer my question. In the doorway, he paused, his back to me. "It's not my place to discuss Mr. Thorne's personal affairs, sir. But if you're asking whether you should take his warning seriously, to face me," he turned, his expression grave, "yes, you should. Very seriously, indeed." After Porter left, on the edge of the bed I sat, trying to make sense of everything. The inheritance, the cryptic warnings, the strange tension among the other guests. To a coherent picture, none of it added up. I decided to look for Harold's study. The letter had said it was behind the master bedroom on the second floor. I was already on the second floor, so it couldn't be far. The corridors of Thornewood were like a labyrinth, turning back on themselves, branching unexpectedly. Twice, I found myself in the same place, having walked in what I thought was a straight line. Normal geometry seemed to defy the house, expanding beyond what should have been possible based on its external appearance. Finally, I found a set of double doors that had to lead to the master suite. They opened onto a sitting room furnished in dark green and gold, with another door leading to what was clearly the master bedroom, a massive space dominated by an ornately carved bed with a canopy. On the far wall, partially hidden behind a tapestry, I found another door. It was locked, but the brass key from Harold's letter fit perfectly. Silently, the door swung open, revealing a circular room with bookshelves lining the walls and a large desk in the center. The only window was a circular skylight in the domed ceiling, casting a pool of light onto the desk. The room had a strange quality to it. The air felt different, heavier somehow, and there was a faint scent that I couldn't quite identify, not unpleasant, but unusual. Old books, perhaps, mixed with something else. Incense, maybe. Meticulously organized was the desk, with stacks of papers, several leather-bound books, and what looked like maps or diagrams. In the center was a wooden cabinet about the size of a small jewelry box. This as well, the brass key unlocked. Inside was a leather-bound journal, just as Harold's letter had promised. The cover was worn, the leather darkened with age and handling. When I opened it, I was surprised to find that the first entry was dated nearly 40 years ago. September 3, 1985, it read. "Today I became the Thorne heir in truth, not just in name. Uncle William is dead, his life cut short like all who came before him. He was 57, older than most, but still too young. As I watched them lower his coffin into the ground, I felt it for the first time, the weight of the obligation, pressing down on me like a physical force. The others felt nothing, of course. Edwin was too busy calculating his share of the inheritance. Margaret was already planning how to redecorate Thornewood. None of them understand what it means to be the true heir. None of them can hear the whispers from the woods. The journal I closed, a chill running down my spine despite the warmth of the room. Whispers from the woods. It sounded like the ramblings of a disturbed mind, but Blackwood had said that Harold was of sound mind until the end, and there had been something in Porter's manner, a weariness when I'd mentioned the occult. Into my pocket, I slipped the journal. I would read it properly later in the privacy of my room. For now, I needed to process everything I'd learned. As I turned to leave, something caught my eye. On one of the bookshelves was a framed photograph, the only personal item in an otherwise academic space. Closer I moved to examine it. The photo showed a group of people at what looked like a family gathering. I recognized a younger Harold Thorne immediately, his height and those distinctive eyes unmistakable. Beside him was a woman who had to be my grandmother, Catherine. She had the same eyes that Edwin had said I'd inherited. And next to her, a young woman who could only be my mother, Elizabeth, perhaps 16 or 17 at the time. They were standing in front of Thornewood Manor, but something about the house looked different. It took me a moment to realize what it was. The left wing, where my bedroom was now located, was a blackened ruin, clearly damaged by fire. Over I turned the frame. On the back was written, "After the fire, summer 1973. The last gathering." Significant must have been the fire if it was referred to as the fire. And, the last gathering, the last time the extended family had come together. My mother had never mentioned a fire, or Thornewood Manor, or any connection to the wealthy Thorne family. Why? To my room I returned, Harold's journal burning a hole in my pocket. There was still time before dinner, enough to start reading, to begin unraveling the mystery I'd stumbled into. But as I reached for the journal, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I found Eliza Ward standing in the hallway, her green eyes studying me intently. "Mr. Collins," she said, "I hope I'm not disturbing you." "Not at all," I said, "and please, call me Matthew." "Matthew, then." Past me into the room, she glanced. "May I come in? There are things we should discuss before dinner. Things the others won't tell you." I hesitated, then stepped aside to let her enter. With a dancer's grace, she moved, her dark hair falling in a curtain as she turned to face me. "You have no idea what you've inherited, do you?" she asked, her voice soft but direct. "A house and a fortune, apparently. And a curse," she added. "Don't forget the curse." "A curse?" I repeated flatly. "You're joking." Serious remained her expression. "Do I look like I'm joking? The Thorne family has been under a curse for generations. Every primary heir dies young, usually in their 50s or early 60s. Harold making it to 73 was something of a miracle. And every heir dies in a way that seems natural, but is just a little too convenient. Heart attacks, strokes, sudden illness, accidents that aren't quite accidental. That's crazy. Is it? Look at the family history. It's all there in the portraits downstairs. Check the dates. None of them made it to old age. None except the ones who weren't primary heirs. I thought of the journal in my pocket, Harold's mention of his uncle dying too young at 57. "Why are you telling me this?" To the window, Eliza moved, looking out over the grounds. "Because I liked Harold. He was kind to me when others weren't. He funded my education, encouraged my interest in anthropology and folklore. And because he chose you for a reason." Back to me, she turned. "You're different from the others. You don't want the Thorne money. Not yet, anyway. I don't even know if I'm going to accept the inheritance." She smiled, a small, sad expression. "That's why he chose you. The choice has to be genuine. That's part of it." "Part of what?" "The obligation he wrote to you about. The price of the Thorne fortune." Closer she stepped. "Harold told me some of it over the years. Pieces of the story. The Thorne wealth didn't come from shrewd investments or family connections. It came from a bargain made centuries ago by the first Thorne to settle in America. A bargain with something old and powerful that lives in the woods surrounding Thornewood." I thought of Harold's journal entry, "None of them can hear the whispers from the woods." What kind of bargain? "The kind that requires regular payment," Eliza said grimly. "Every Thorne heir becomes the caretaker of the bargain. They ensure the terms are met, the payments made. In return, the family prospers. But the price is high. No heir lives to see old age. And if an heir fails in their duty..." Toward the window, she gestured. "Did you notice how the forest seems to press in on the grounds? How the trees seem to watch the house? There was a Thorne heir in the 1920s who tried to renege on the bargain. The forest began to encroach, swallowing parts of the estate. Family members started disappearing. Strange accidents. It only stopped when the heir's son took over and restored the proper order." "You're talking about human sacrifice," I said, my voice hollow. Her head, Eliza shook. "No, nothing so crude. The bargain isn't about blood. Not directly. It's about energy. Life force. Years of life. The heir gives up decades they might have lived, siphoned away slowly over time. That's why they die young, their vitality drained." "This is insane," I said. "You're telling me Harold Thorne, a modern man with a Harvard education, believed in some supernatural bargain with a forest spirit. Harold didn't just believe in it. He lived it for decades. Ask yourself why a rational man would structure his will the way he did. Why he would leave everything to a distant relative he barely knew, bypassing people who had been part of his life for years. Toward the door, she moved. Read his journal. All of it. Then decide. In the doorway, she paused. One more thing. Be careful around the others. Especially Margaret. She's furious about being passed over. She and Richard have been positioning themselves for years, cultivating Harold, looking after him. The fact that he left everything to you, she won't accept it easily. And Edwin. Edwin is complicated. He's the last of the previous generation. He knows more about the Thorne history than anyone, but he's bitter. He was passed over as heir decades ago when Harold's uncle chose Harold instead of him. He spent his life on the periphery, watching, waiting for his chance. A long look she gave me. All of them will try to influence you in the coming days. Trust none of them completely. Including you? I asked. A smile flickered across her face. Especially me. I have my own reasons for being here. With that, she slipped out the door, leaving me alone with more questions than answers. I had just enough time before dinner to read a few more entries in Harold's journal. December 15, 1985, one entry read. The dreams have started. Uncle William warned me about them. Visions of the woods at night, of the ancient oak at the center of the grove, of the door that isn't a door. Last night, I saw it clearly for the first time, the spiral pattern carved into the trunk, the symbols that seem to shift when you look at them directly. And I heard the voice, the one that has spoken to every Thorne heir since Nathaniel made the original bargain in 1784. It knows me. It called me by name. Another entry, dated a year later, November 3, 1986. I made the first payment today, on Samhain, as tradition dictates. The ritual was exactly as described in the family grimoire. I felt it, the drawing away of something vital within me, like a siphon attached to my very essence. The physicians will find nothing wrong, of course. They never do. But I've aged more in one night than in the previous year. A small price to pay for the continued prosperity of the Thorne line. But I understand now why the heirs always look so much older than their years. And then a more recent entry that made my blood run cold, July 18, 2024. I've made a decision that will upend the careful balance I've maintained for decades. I'm naming Matthew Collins as my heir. The others will be furious, but none of them are suitable. The bloodline must be pure, uncompromised by previous exposure to the entity. Matthew is the last branch of the family that remains untouched. His grandmother Catherine was wise enough to cut all ties with Thornewood and the Thorne fortune. She married a man with no connection to our world and disappeared into a normal life. Her daughter Elizabeth never knew the truth. And now her son Matthew represents our last hope of breaking the cycle. For I have discovered something in the oldest family records, a possibility no previous heir has explored, a loophole in the original bargain. If I am right, Matthew may be able to do what none of us could, end the bargain without destroying the family. But the choice must be his, freely made with full knowledge. I can only guide him to the truth and hope he has the strength to face it. The journal I closed, my hands trembling slightly. Either Harold Thorne had been delusional, caught in a family myth that had been passed down for generations, or there was something genuinely supernatural at work at Thornewood Manor. Neither possibility was comforting. Porter's arrival to escort me to dinner was announced by a soft knock at the door. Away in a drawer I tucked the journal and tried to compose myself. Whatever the truth about the Thorne curse, I needed to keep my wits about me. The people gathering for dinner had just seen their expected inheritance handed to a stranger. As Eliza had warned, I couldn't trust any of them completely. The dining room was as impressive as the rest of Thornewood. A long table that could seat 20 was set with fine china and crystal, silver candelabras cast a warm glow over the proceedings. Large windows looked out onto the gardens, though with night falling, they reflected the room back like dark mirrors. Everyone was already seated when Porter showed me in. Blackwood at one end of the table, Edwin at the other, Margaret and Richard on one side, Eliza on the other. My place, Porter indicated, was beside Eliza, facing Margaret and Richard. "Mr. Collins," Blackwood said as I took my seat, "I trust you've had time to settle in." "Yes, thank you," I replied, acutely aware of Margaret's cold stare. "And have you had a chance to explore Thornewood?" Edwin asked from the head of the table. "It's quite a remarkable house. Been in the family for 7 generations. I've only seen a small part of it," I admitted. "You should take a proper tour tomorrow," Edwin said. "I'd be happy to show you around, point out some of the historical features." His rheumy eyes had a sharp glint to them. "The history of this house is the history of our family. Might help you understand why Harold made the choices he did." "That's very kind of you." "Edwin knows all the family skeletons," Margaret said, her voice carrying a hint of mockery. "Don't you, Edwin? All the dark secrets." "Every family has its secrets, Margaret," Edwin replied calmly. "Some are just better at keeping them than others." The first course arrived, a delicate soup served by a staff I hadn't seen before. The kitchen must have been fully staffed, as Harold's will had suggested. "So, Mr. Collins," Richard said as we began to eat, "Harold's letter mentioned you're a teacher." "Yes. High school English." "How noble," Margaret said in a tone that suggested it was anything but. "Dedicating yourself to molding young minds, though I imagine the salary leaves something to be desired." "It's adequate," I said. "I've never been particularly motivated by money." "How fortunate, then, that it's found you anyway," she replied with a tight smile. "What Margaret means," Richard said, "is that it must be quite a shock, going from a teacher's salary to being one of the wealthiest men in New England overnight." "I haven't decided to accept yet," I said. A moment of stunned silence fell around the table. "You can't be serious," Margaret finally said. "Quite serious. It's a major life change. I need time to consider it." "Consider what?" Richard asked. "It's $70 million and a historic estate. What's to consider?" "Perhaps Mr. Collins understands that wealth brings complications," Blackwood interjected. "Responsibilities. Obligations." "Obligations?" Edwin echoed, nodding slowly. "Yes. The Thorne heir has always had obligations." "What kind of obligations?" I asked, looking directly at Edwin. For a long moment, he studied me. "Harold didn't tell you?" "He left some cryptic instructions." "Ah." Edwin nodded. "The journal, I presume?" I hesitated, not wanting to reveal too much. "Among other things." "Edwin, really?" Margaret cut in. "Are we going to indulge this nonsense?" Harold's eccentricities were one thing, but to perpetuate these ridiculous family myths, "They're not myths, Margaret," Edwin said sharply. "You've lived at Thornewood long enough to know that. You've seen things. We all have." "I've seen an old house with drafty corridors and creaky floorboards," she replied. "I've seen an intelligent man who let himself be consumed by superstition and folklore. What I haven't seen is any evidence of curses or bargains or whatever other nonsense you and Harold convinced yourselves was real." "Margaret has always been the practical one," Richard said with a small smile. "Feet firmly on the ground. One of us had to be," she said. "Someone had to manage the day-to-day while Harold locked himself in that study, poring over ancient texts and conducting his rituals." To me, she turned. "Is that what he's left you, Mr. Collins? A collection of musty old books and a family superstition?" "Among other things," I repeated. You know, Eliza said, speaking for the first time since dinner began, anthropologically speaking, family curses are fascinating cultural phenomena. They persist because they serve a purpose, usually to explain patterns of misfortune or to enforce certain behaviors within the family structure. Thank you, Professor Ward, Margaret said dryly. Your academic insights are always so illuminating. I'm just saying, Eliza continued, that whether or not one believes in the supernatural elements, family curses often have real effects. They shape behavior, influence decisions, create self-fulfilling prophecies. Exactly right, Edwin said, nodding approvingly at Eliza. The Thorne curse, real or imagined, has shaped this family for generations. It's why Catherine ran. It's why Harold never married or had children. It's why I've lived on the periphery all these years, watching and waiting. Waiting for what? I asked. For someone to break it, Edwin replied simply. Every generation hopes they'll be the one. Harold thought he'd found a way near the end. Something in the oldest family records, he said. I thought of the journal entry I'd just read. A loophole in the original bargain. And did he? I asked. Find a way. Penetrating was Edwin's gaze. He seemed to think so. But he also believed it couldn't be him. It had to be someone new to the bargain. Someone with the bloodline but untainted by previous transactions. Me, I said. You, Edwin confirmed. This is absurd, Margaret said, putting down her fork with a clatter. We're sitting here discussing fairy tales while the future of Thornewood hangs in the balance. Mr. Collins, let me be direct. If you're not interested in the inheritance, decline it now. The house and fortune will be divided as it should have been in the first place, among those who actually knew Harold, who were part of his life. That's not what the will stipulates, Blackwood said. If Mr. Collins declines, everything goes to charity. No one at this table receives anything beyond what Harold specifically designated. Then we'll contest it, Margaret insisted, on grounds of undue influence or mental incapacity. No rational person leaves their entire fortune to a virtual stranger. Harold was examined by 3 independent psychiatrists in the months before his death, Blackwood replied calmly. At my insistence, precisely to prevent such challenges. Their reports all concluded the same thing. Harold Thorne was of sound mind with no evidence of cognitive impairment or undue influence. Everyone can be bought, Margaret said coldly. Not everyone, Mrs. Thorne, Blackwood replied, his tone equally cold. And I would advise you to be cautious about making such accusations. They could be construed as defamatory. Palpable was the tension around the table. At Eliza I glanced, who gave me a slight nod as if to say, I told you so. Perhaps, Edwin said, his voice cutting through the tension, we should allow Mr. Collins the time stipulated in the will to make his decision. 30 days is not so long to wait for the resolution of a matter that has been developing for centuries. In strained conversation about neutral topics, the weather, the quality of the food, the history of certain pieces of artwork displayed around the manor, the remainder of the dinner passed. Throughout it all, I felt Margaret's resentful gaze and Edwin's calculating one. Only Eliza seemed genuinely unconcerned with my decision, though I suspected she had her own agenda. After dinner, Edwin asked if I would join him for a brandy in the library. Despite my weariness, I agreed. The old man clearly knew more about the Thorne family history than anyone else present. And if I was going to understand what I'd stumbled into, I needed information. Into the library, Porter wheeled Edwin and positioned him near the fireplace where a small fire had been lit against the evening chill. From a crystal decanter, he poured 2 snifters of brandy, handed one to each of us, then discreetly withdrew. You have questions, Edwin said once we were alone. Ask them. Is the curse real? I asked bluntly. Smiled Edwin, swirling the brandy in his glass. Direct. Good. Harold said you would be. A sip he took before continuing. The curse, as you call it, is real in the sense that it has observable effects. Every primary Thorne heir for 7 generations has died relatively young. Usually from what appear to be natural causes, but always with a certain convenience to their timing. None have lived past 75. Most die much younger. And you believe this is because of some supernatural bargain? What I believe is less important than what the evidence suggests, Edwin replied. The Thorne fortune has survived economic depressions, world wars, market crashes, and every other financial calamity for nearly 2.5 centuries. We've never lost our wealth. Investments always pay off. Business ventures always succeed. Properties always appreciate. It's as if the family operates under a different set of rules than the rest of the world. Lucky investments don't prove the existence of the supernatural. No, he said. But consider this. In 1929, just before the stock market crash, every Thorne investment was mysteriously liquidated and converted to gold. In 1973, weeks before the oil crisis, the family divested from all petroleum-related holdings. In 2008, months before the housing bubble burst, Thorne financial managers were instructed to short the market. Each time, the instructions came from the primary heir, who claimed to have a feeling or a dream warning them. Leaned forward Edwin. And then there's the woods. What about the woods? Thornewood Manor sits on 500 acres surrounded by forest. But if you check land surveys from the past 2 centuries, you'll find something strange. The forest has remained exactly the same size. Despite logging operations in the region, despite development, despite forest fires that have affected neighboring properties, it's as if the woods around Thornewood exist in a bubble, untouched by the forces that shape the rest of the world. That could be explained by careful conservation, I pointed out. Perhaps, he said. But can conservation explain why no one who enters the deepest part of the woods ever returns? Why the locals avoid the forest entirely, with stories going back generations about strange lights and whispered voices? Why animals refuse to cross the boundary into certain areas? His head, Edwin shook. I've lived on the edges of the Thorne world my entire life, Matthew. I've watched. I've studied. I've collected evidence. Whatever you want to call it, a curse, a bargain, a pact, something unnatural is at work here. If you believe all this, why did you want to be the heir? Why are you bitter about being passed over? Dry was Edwin's laugh. Who said I wanted to be the heir? I never did. I was relieved when William chose Harold instead of me. But I wanted to understand. To know the truth. Harold kept me at arm's length, like all the primary heirs before him. We're family, but not privy to the inner circle. Not allowed into the study where the real business of the Thorne legacy takes place. Then why are you angry about the will? I'm not angry about the will. I'm angry about being kept in the dark for 70 years. About watching my relatives die young while I've lived to become an old man. Wondering if my longevity is simply the curse's way of tormenting me with what I can never have. Another sip of brandy he took. But that's my burden, not yours. You have a more immediate decision to make. Harold's journal mentioned a loophole. A way to break the cycle. Sharpened Edwin's eyes. Did it? That's more than he ever told me. What kind of loophole? He didn't say exactly. Just that it had to be someone new to the bargain. Someone with the bloodline but untainted by previous transactions. Interesting. Into the fire, Edwin stared, lost in thought. The original bargain was made by Nathaniel Thorne in 1784. The family records say he was a failed merchant, desperate and destitute, when he came upon a strange grove in the woods. What happened there is described only in the vaguest terms, a meeting, an offer, an acceptance. But the next year, Nathaniel's fortunes reversed dramatically. He founded what would become the Thorne shipping empire, built Thornewood Manor, established the family as a power in the region. And the price? The records say only that payment comes due at the appointed time. But we know from observation that each primary heir dies younger than they should, their vitality somehow drained away. And we know that on certain dates, Samhain, the winter solstice, Beltane, the summer solstice, the heir performs certain rituals in the grove at the center of the woods. With his gaze, Edwin fixed me. Harold performed those rituals faithfully for nearly 40 years. Now, if you accept the inheritance, they become your responsibility. And if I decline? Then what? According to family lore, the bargain goes unfulfilled. And the consequences? Toward the windows beyond which lay darkness, he gestured. The woods begin to encroach. The protection ends. The fortune crumbles. And those connected to the Thorne bloodline start to meet with accidents. That sounds like a threat. Not from me, Edwin said. I'm just telling you what the family records claim happened the last time an heir refused the responsibility, in the 1920s. The heir's son had to take over to stop the deaths. His brandy he finished. But perhaps Harold found a way out. A loophole, as you said. If so, you're in a unique position. You could accept the inheritance, learn what Harold discovered, and potentially free the family from this cycle. Or I could walk away now, I said. Go back to my life and pretend none of this ever happened. Studied me, Edwin. Could you? Knowing what you know now. Wondering for the rest of your life what might have been true, what might have been possible. His head, he shook. You're a Thorne by blood, Matthew. Whether you use the name or not. Curiosity is in our nature. It's what led Nathaniel to make the bargain in the first place. It's what kept Harold searching for a way out until the end. You'll want to know the truth. The question is whether you're willing to risk finding it.